Now, viewers of last night's 3 News Leaders debate were treated to some new technology. In a world first, the at-home audience could show their reaction to John Key and Phil Goff through the Roy Morgan Reactor. There was also a more traditional worm showing the reactions of the audience of undecided voters. But that's raised some controversy too, with the neutrality of that audience now being questioned. Joining me now is Roy Morgan's Chief Executive, Michele Levine. Good morning, Michele. Thank you for coming in. Can you explain to me, if you like, in the first instance, how these two worms work? OK,
there are two separate things. In the studio, the audience who are sitting there actually have a dial that they hold in their hand, and they will, as they feel positively towards what's being said, they'll move the dial to the right. As they feel negatively, they'll move it to the left. So this becomes really unconscious. They just sit there, they watch the leaders debate and listen to the questions and answers and indicate how they feel. Now, the other group of people are the rest of New Zealand. Anyone who had a smartphone could download the app, and then sitting in their own home, they could be reacting with their mobile phone, essentially moving their finger right or left on the screen. OK. So what's been called into question here is the studio audience and whether they were biased and whether there was Labour activists among them. How is that studio audience chosen? Yes. The studio audience is actually the important one. That's the one that's meant to be a nice group of uncommitted voters. And it was recruited by a company that simply recruits people, that recruit them for all sorts of things. And they were asked to find people who hadn't yet made up their mind how they were going to vote. And they were asked to make sure that they had sort of about half female, half male, some people who are younger, some people who are older. So a balanced group of uncommitted voters. Now, what you have to realise is that an uncommitted voter still might be leaning one way or the other, and they have a voting history. So they're not blank slates. OK. What I want to bring into question is, I hear what you're saying, but it's very difficult to determine. This is perhaps the worm's downfall, perhaps. It's difficult to determine if someone is biased. I know the right-wing blogger David Farrar last night raised, he came up with one of those who were involved who was tweeting that he was there. He's actually a Labour Party activist. He also brought up another name, and when you search for that name, it brings you to the grassroots Labour page. So clearly, fairly staunch Labour supporters there. How did they make it through to the studio audience? I have no idea if there are those two people there in the studio audience. They say they were there. They were tweeting that they were there. And maybe they were. I mean, a group recruiting company will simply recruit people. They'll either do it on the telephone or they'll be looking for people. One of the key things, though, is the recruitment company goes out looking for people rather than people sort of knocking on the door and saying, can I be in it? But look, 2 Labour voters is not going to make the major difference. More. Did you start getting suspicious when Phil Goff spoke and you would see this huge spike, which is quite extraordinary? When Key spoke, it would plunge at times. Yes. Did that not raise suspicions for you? Look, it didn't, and that's one of the key things that we at Roy Morgan are looking at this, looking at the screen, and we're able to see how those who have a tendency to think Labour are feeling, and those who have a tendency to think National are feeling, and those who are thinking Green. So in the audience, we're able to see, we see different lines. We see a blue line, we see a red line and a green line. It did seem to spike quite dramatically towards Labour, though, and so if you were leaning that way, I'm not sure what Goff was saying would suddenly make you say, that's absolutely the way I'm going to vote. If you're undecided, you're still throwing your balls in your air, really, aren't you? Yes, yes. But look, what we did see, I think, overall, is that John Key divided the group. You know, if you were a sort of a national leaner, and we saw this from the phone-in people, and they were not uncommitted. We had National voters, we had Labour voters. John Key didn't really manage to move too many Labour voters towards his point of view, or Green voters towards his point of view. However, Phil Goff, not only did he retain his Labour and Green voter support, he managed to move some of the National voters towards his perspective. Okay. Do you think that the worm is something of a gimmick, perhaps best kept away from a political environment? Maybe it's better to be used for, say, something like gauging a studio audience's reaction on X Factor. Oh, I think it's a fantastic thing for X Factor.
But maybe not for politics?
No, I think it's terrific for politics. I think given this query, a lot more effort perhaps needs to be put into the audience. But personally, I don't have a concern about that audience. I watched the way that they reacted. We actually polled them as they arrived. So I don't have major concerns about it.
OK. All right, Michele Levine, do appreciate your time this morning.